alaikum. Welcome to our show, The Awaited, which is dedicated to coming to understand the Imam of our time, alayhi salam, better. And today I have with me Dr. Chris Hewer, who is an academic who has specialised in Christianity and Islam as well. And we are going to be looking at a question from a certain angle, which is if we were to explain the phenomenon of the Imam alayhi salam to Christians, what would we say? What would our explanation be? Where will Christians fit in at the time of the Imam's reappearance? And so inshallah today we will be unpacking some questions and hopefully gaining a greater understanding. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
One of the interesting issues was that there has been some debate as to whether there will be Christians around at the time of the reappearance of the Imam, or whether everyone will by that time be Muslim. But as someone has noted, there's evidence in the Holy Quran for the fact that there will be Christians at the time of the Imam's appearance. For example, we have Surah Ma'idah 14, where it says, "And with those who say we are Christians, we took a covenant, and they have forgotten a portion of that which they were reminded of. So we have stirred up among them enmity and hatred till the day of resurrection," which is obviously talking about the different groups. And then Surah Al-Imran 55, where it says, "When God said, 'Jesus, I will take thee to me, and I will purify thee of those who believe not. I will set thy followers above the unbelievers till the resurrection day.'" So those who believe in Jesus will be set above the unbelievers until the day of resurrection. And there is also evidence for the presence of Jews as well, who similarly in Surah Ma'idah 64, because of a more materialistic way of thinking as well, were divided until the day of resurrection. I mean, in addition to that, it has been said in the narrations that the Shias will be divided as well until that time. So the Imam is expected to come and unify the intellects of people. But suffice to say that there will be Christians around at the time of the Imam. I was wondering, have you had any conversations with Christians about this, or if we were to, for example, have a conversation with a Christian and say, "Did you know that there will be Christians at the time of the reappearance of the Imam?" What might some of the questions that a Christian might come up with as to, well, what's going to happen to us at that time?
I think it's good to separate out two things. One is Christians around at the day of resurrection, therefore around at the final judgment. Therefore, by definition, Christians will be around at the time of the return of the Imam al-Mahdi. Secondly, given that we do not know when that will happen, it could be today, it could be before this program is over. Given the fact that there are Christians still around, it seems to me to be a wholly reasonable question. So let's work on the basis that there are Christians around when Imam al-Mahdi returns. And I think that Christians would then want to ask questions like, well, where will we be at that time? What's our position going to be? How can we fit that event into our own Christian theological perspective? So they wanted to see it from 2 points of view, if you like, from an Islamic point of view, but also from a Christian theological point of view, to say, well, how could we work with that?
And I think that's it's a very interesting question, which I mentioned to some people and they didn't quite get what I was getting at, but I think it's important for us to think about things from different perspectives, other people's perspectives, in order to be able to provide a good explanation, because you can't just try to force a doctrine or force a concept on someone, or the way their think, or their the framework of their beliefs. And And so there needs to be, and I believe there is, looking into the sources, some rational explanation as to how the Mahdi would fit in, how a Christian could accept the reappearance, let's say, of a Mahdi, in addition to the reappearance of Jesus, peace be upon him, as well. I mean, one of the things that people do find difficult, I suppose, is the issue of occultation. As you have said in a note, it seems like a fairy story, and I think that definitely in this day and age, where the predominant thinking, especially in Europe, I think more than the States, is that this whole thing about the unseen is just a load of stories, and grown-up people don't believe in this kind of thing. But also, as you said, Christians might also find that the issue of occultation difficult, and yet we do have examples of occultation in the Bible. How might, do you think, that be, or how could we explain that to a Christian?
I think that we have, again, to draw a distinction between how do you prove a historical fact and how do you make a statement of faith and belief. If we look at it on the level of historical fact, then it is something that's going to be extremely difficult to prove, because we have, even from the time of the occultation itself, questions. We didn't even know that the 11th Imam, Hassan al-Askari, has a son.
Yeah.
So even questions, well, did he ever exist? Let alone did he go into occultation? So it's been an issue of historical debate from that time onwards. And, well, if somebody can solve that, they're much cleverer than I am. Turning to the second part of it, which is looking at it as a question of faith and belief. I, as a Christian, would want to say, well, if you think that's special, just listen to what I have to ask people to believe.
True.
And that is, the resurrection to eternal life of Jesus. So that makes the occultation of the 12th Imam, as it were, pale into a certain degree of insignificance in terms of incredulity.
That's a good point. It's interesting that people do say, in fact, even non-Shia Muslims will say, come on, this is, even though they believe in the Mi'raj, the ascension of the Holy Prophet through the seven heavens, and other blessings and miracles, when it comes to this, they'll say, well, this is clearly just a fairy story that's been made up by the lovers of the Ahlulbayt. So it's interesting how people can be quite selective about what they want to believe in.
Ultimately, though, this is a question of the depth of your faith in God. Because if you believe that God is all-powerful and that God can do whatsoever God wants, it is perfectly within the power of God to remove someone from our sight for a period of years we know not how long, and that person should then reappear.
Yeah.
Are we really going to say that God couldn't possibly do that? Nonsense. So this is a question about your belief in the omnipotence of God. And God, being all-powerful, is certainly capable of doing that. So therefore, it is not believing the impossible, but it is an article of faith within a particular religious tradition.
Yeah. And there are also obviously examples in the Bible of other occultations or prophets.
Well, there are mysterious disappearances and there are mysterious appearances. No one knows where he came from, no one knows where he went to. And these are often a reminder to us that we human beings are not to think that we understand all the ways of God.
Yeah.
That God is beyond our wildest expectation. and beyond our capacity to understand. So I think that often we need a little reminder, a little sense of just have a degree of humility.
Yeah. Don't be complacent about what you can measure or what you can't measure, or because obviously many people nowadays will say, well, if it can't be tested, then I'm not interested in knowing about it, or if it can't be proven, then I'm not going to believe it until it's proven. And yet there are so many things that can't be proven through sort of a limited way of thinking or applying certain methods of trying to understand that.
And those same people are never too keen to prove the theory of is there life after death or not?
Yeah.
Because they never want to put that one to the test.
Yeah. Good point.
So we need to leave God to be God. And I think one of our failings as religious people is to talk about God, and I know what God wants.
Yeah.
I know what God will do. Just as though I was sitting having a cup of tea with God last night.
Yeah.
Well, don't kid yourself, because God is beyond your wildest expectations.
Yeah. That's a very good point as well. People trying to sort of anticipate, as you say, what his nature, his capabilities, powers, and intentions, will, etc. We also have, as you said, trying to explain to Christians, for example, why is there a need for a living imam? And this, of course, would go to many Muslims as well. But why is there a need for a living imam? Why is he hidden? In fact, I know that some non-Shia Muslims, they will say, well, surely if the imam was around, it would be his duty to come out and fight against injustice and implement justice. I don't know if that would be the same question that a Christian might have, or whether they might have another type of question related to the necessity for a living imam.
First of all, I think there's always a great difficulty that we need to try to see things from God's perspective, not from our perspective.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, someone might say, well, surely life is rotten enough in the world, why hasn't the imam reappeared? Well, from God's perspective, it may not be the right time.
Yeah.
So we need to learn humility and to shelve that question. Secondly, to answer the question, why does there need to be a living imam at all times, you need to build, as it were, a conceptual framework. Mm-hmm. You can't answer that question without understanding the nature and the function of the imam, or of the imamate, within the Shia theological structure. And once we say that, the imams are those beings of such exalted spirituality, of such knowledge and wisdom, that it is their duty, their responsibility, to guide humankind in the right way on the path that will lead to God, and that without their guidance, humankind will necessarily go astray. Now, if you start from that conceptual framework, then you would say, well, if the imam was not present and in some sense active, then God would be unjust.
Right.
Because God would have left us to go astray and taken away the guide and shepherd from us. Mm-hmm. Well, God is not unjust. Therefore, God leaves the guide with us, the imam with us. And so the imam becomes, as it were, the pole star that guides creation, in particular guides humanity, on the path that leads to God. Mm-hmm. And without that, God would be fundamentally unjust.
And also, as you raised a point about the presence, or the presence of the imam in the whole created order. I mean, again, obviously it is believed that, or even in the teachings, Ithna Ashari, the 12 teachings, that were it not for the Imam, then there wouldn't be creation. And people might, again, sort of try to get their head around that. But the fact that, as he has been called in some narrations, the qutb, or as you say, the pole around which everything is kept in a certain order. But why would it be necessary for him to be hidden and not be visibly active? Well, you've said we'll put that aside, but do you think that if we did explain to a Christian that his kind of cosmic function as someone who is still acting within the cosmos, within the universe, that might be one way of explaining it?
I think that's the kind of discussion that one needs to have in order to give people some kind of insight. And I think that it's very important when we're talking about interfaith discussion that what we're aiming to do is to help people come to an understanding of what the other faith tradition is teaching. Not necessarily to get them to agree. So it's a question of making knowledge accessible, not necessarily acceptable. And so if we're going to make the knowledge accessible, then we have to build that framework so that they can see what it means to be the qutb within that system. And to see not just the impact of the Imam in terms of the human order, but in terms of the whole creation. So we have within the Christian scriptures the image of the whole of creation groaning with eager longing for its fulfillment.
Right.
And its fulfillment comes in the end time. So we are again talking in end time theology, as we say. But this idea of the renewal of the whole of creation, and not just of the human being, is, I think, something that knowledgeable Christians can share in bringing to an understanding of the Imam. The question about was it necessary that the Imam should go into occultation, I think this is one of those questions that we have to say with humility, let's leave that up to God. Why is God's question? That's according to God's guidance. We can have theories, we can speculate and talk about the mystical presence, but in a sense, when the Imam goes into occultation, he becomes closer to us than he can be in his physical presence. Because his presence is a spiritual presence within us, or that we can share as spiritual beings. And therefore we can have a closeness on the level of spirituality which goes deeper and transcends our closeness on the level of corporality, of physical presence.
Actually, it is also, confirmable. We could say that spirituality is within us because of that beautiful narration, I think, by Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, where he says that the Imam in the heart of the believer is like a shining sun. So there is this concept of the sort of connecting to the Imam internally, through the heart.
I always draw the image there of the dervish, the whirling dervish, who aligns his head with the axis of the earth, whose one hand is raised, as it were, to receive the spiritual gift, and his other hand is extended downwards to be the conduit through which this grace flows. It flows, of course, through the purified heart of the dervish. And therefore, in a sense, we can see the Imam in occultation, in particular, as being the conduit through which that guidance flows.
Yeah. And
therefore, closer to us in our hearts than he could ever be in corporality.
Mm-hmm. That would be a very good explanation. I'm just as a side point, I'm curious to know. I'm thinking of this in real terms as well, in terms of actual Christian communities, for example, in London, who may obviously not be very aware of these doctrines because it is a minority as well, and perhaps what moves people from the Ahlulbayt community, lovers of Ahlulbayt community, should take to kind of explain, what this is.
You have a problem, first of all, and it's always the problem of a community that, in linear historical terms, comes after another community. So you can search the Christian scriptures and you don't find mention of Imam Mahdi.
Yeah.
Therefore, I would say that for 99.9% of people who would call themselves Christians around in British society, it's an absolutely unasked question. There is a good point about this, because at least you don't have to undo the damage that's already been done by misunderstanding. So you have a clean sheet upon which to work.
Yeah.
Then the really crucial question is how to find the right formula of words, the right set of concepts to convey that knowledge to people outside your community.
Yeah.
Because so often our discourse is within our own community. It's as though we all understand this anyway.
Yeah.
Well, the reality is, if we're very honest, an awful lot of people don't.
Yeah.
An awful lot of good Shia people have exactly these same questions, especially those who've been educated and taught to think like a Westerner, because their philosophical approach, their educational approach is very much like the same as the average Christian on the street or the average non-religious person on the street. That's their way of thinking about it.
So it's about becoming much more conscious in the way that we convey this phenomenon or this doctrine or belief. There's that necessity for putting yourself in someone else's position and reflecting upon what would be an effective way of communicating that.
I think that there are two important principles there which would, as it were, guide my teaching about this. One is to say, if we are to take the fundamental principle of Islam seriously, that this is the natural way, this is the Deen al-Fitr, that as we speak about Islam, there ought to be a reverberation within the heart of the hearer.
Right.
Who is not necessarily Muslim or religious in any way, but is a human being. So if we are talking genuinely about Islam, human beings who hear should be able to feel that reverberation in their own hearts.
Right.
The second thing is to say, if we're talking about understanding a religious tradition, there are two levels at which this understanding operates. There's the intellectual understanding, which we can talk about in philosophical terms, but then there's also the intuitive understanding, and that is we need to understand in our hearts. And therefore one of the tasks that Shia people need to take up in talking about this is not just to talk about historical event and philosophical concept, but actually to say, what difference does it make to me as a believer that my Imam is a living, real, active force in my life today?
Thank you, very good point. And we are about to go to break. Inshallah, we will see you in a few minutes. to Christians? What would we say? What would our explanation be? Where will Christians fit in at the time of the Imam's reappearance? And so inshallah today we will be unpacking some questions and hopefully gaining a greater understanding. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
One of the interesting issues was that there has been some debate as to whether there will be Christians around at the time of the reappearance of the Imam, or whether everyone will by that time be Muslim. But as someone has noted, there's evidence in the Holy Quran for the fact that there will be Christians at the time of the Imam's appearance. For example, we have Surah Ma'idah 14, where it says, "And with those who say we are Christians, we took a covenant, and they have forgotten a portion of that which they were reminded of. So we have stirred up among them enmity and hatred till the day of resurrection," which is obviously talking about the different groups. And then Surah Al-Imran 55, where it says, "When God said, 'Jesus, I will take thee to me, and I will purify thee of those who believe not. I will set thy followers above the unbelievers till the resurrection day.'" So those who believe in Jesus will be set above the unbelievers until the day of resurrection. And there is also evidence for the presence of Jews as well, who similarly in Surah Ma'idah 64, because of a more materialistic way of thinking as well, were divided until the day of resurrection. I mean, in addition to that, it has been said in the narrations that the Shias will Assalamu alaikum, welcome to our show, The Awaited, which is dedicated to coming to understand the Imam of our time, alayhi salam, better. And today I have with me Dr. Chris Hewer, who is an academic who has specialised in Christianity and Islam as well. And we are going to be looking at a question from a certain angle, which is if we were to explain the phenomenon of the Imam, alayhi salam,